Hello everyone, welcome back to Salesforce Predator. In this channel we discuss about various concepts and technologies in Salesforce. In this video series, we are discussing about Salesforce integration. In today's video, we'll be discussing JSON parsing in Apex Web Services. So JSON is a popular data format that is used to exchange data between different systems. In case of Apex Web Services, JSON can be used as a request or even response format for REST APIs. So today's agenda would be what exactly is JSON, what is parsing in Salesforce, what is JSON utility class in Salesforce, then we'll see deserialization and serialization of a data, we'll see untyped JSON parsing method, we'll see scenarios where untyped JSON parsing method is preferred, we'll also see Apex class-based parsing method to parse a JSON data, we'll see the scenarios where Apex class-based parsing method is preferred, and later on we'll see the best practices for JSON parsing in Apex. So let's start. Now we have already discussed JSON and XML in one of our previous video. So if you want, you can go and watch that video to get more in-depth knowledge on how we can create JSON data and how we can use it. Here I'll give you a little overview about that. So JSON is nothing but a JavaScript object notation which is used for storing and exchanging data between different systems. JSON uses key value pairs to represent data where keys are usually strings and values can be string, arrays, objects, numbers, etc. In Apex, web services are often used to expose data and functionality to external systems. So we can use JSON as a required data format over there. To understand Apex Web Services, it is very important to get good grab on how to get an incoming JSON request from external services and convert or parse that request into a format which we can utilize in Apex classes so we can perform our required operations. Okay. So next we'll discuss what exactly is parsing in Apex. So the process of converting a JSON string into a data structure that can be easily managed and manipulated in Apex is nothing but the parsing of JSON. Now Salesforce has already provided JSON utility class that have methods for serialization and deserialization of a data into a JSON format. Okay, so if you go to the Salesforce library, you'll see a JSON class present over there, and it has several methods, let's say for serialization or deserialization of a data. So in this video, we are going to discuss a couple of them. Okay, and if you want to get more details on the JSON class, you can visit Apex library. You can like visit all these methods and understand what exactly these do. Okay. Now, if you are working with integration, you will often come across term deserialization and serialization. So what exactly these means? Deserialization is nothing but converting a JSON string into a data structure such as maps or class instances. Okay. Whereas serialization is reverse of that. It means converting the Apex maps or objects into a JSON string. Okay. So where do we need this? So let's go to our whiteboard and understand this better. So let's consider we have an external system which is making REST callouts to Salesforce, and Salesforce we have written a web service. Okay. So an external system would be sending a request in a JSON format, and when we get the request in Salesforce, the web service will parse the JSON request into a usable structures like map or class instances. Now this process of converting or parsing a JSON request into a maps or a class instance is nothing but deserialization. Then the Apex will perform necessary operations and prepare a response data. Further, we'll pass the response data into a JSON format again and send back the response to external system. So this process of parsing a map or class instances into a JSON format is nothing but serialization. Okay. In Apex, we have two ways to parse a JSON request. So we can either use untyped JSON parsing method or we can use Apex class-based parsing method. So first we'll discuss untyped JSON parsing method. The untyped JSON parsing method uses deserialized untyped method to parse the JSON data into a map, which is collection of key value pairs. Now this method is useful when you don't know the structure of a JSON data or when you want to parse the data into a flexible data structure. Okay. So we have deserialize untyped method from JSON utility class, which we can use to parse the JSON request. So you just have to pass the JSON string as a parameter to this method, and it will return a map of string comma object, where string would be key and object would be value. Okay. So let's see a scenario where we can use the untyped JSON parsing method. Okay. So let's say you have a REST resource that allow client to submit user feedback. Okay. And the feedback can include a rating, it can have a message and optional comments on various aspects of a service. Okay, so the JSON request might look like this. You have a customer name who is submitting the feedback. The rating customer wants to give you, and if he wants to write some message there, and then he can add comments based on some parameters. So let's say response time or friendliness or quality, and customers can add more comments over here based on some different parameters, for example cost. Okay, so the important point to note over here is the structure of this JSON data is not fixed, it's dynamic. Okay, so customers can add as many comments as they want for different parameters, right? So these keys are not fixed, right? So to handle this kind of request, we have to do untyped JSON parsing. Okay, so for handling this request, we have created some configurations in our Salesforce org. I'll show you how we can make call out to Salesforce org and pass this JSON request, and how we are parsing this using an Apex web service and converting it into a map and using it further, right? So to show all these things, I have created a custom object feedback in Salesforce. Okay, we have some custom fields, let's say message and rating, right? So these will store the details related to feedback, and we have another object that's nothing but comments, right? And we have created a relationship between these two objects where feedback would be the master and comments would be the child object. Okay, so you can see a master detail field created over here in the comment object, right? So we'll go to our Salesforce developer console. So here I have already written a web service. So this web service will handle the incoming request from the external systems. We will be discussing web services in detail in some of our next videos. But for now, just understand, if Salesforce want to expose some of its custom functionalities, so we can write a web service for that, and we can add different methods like HTTP post or HTTP get for handling the incoming request from external system. Okay. So let's say if external system makes a post call to Salesforce, and it specifies this URL specified here in the URL mapping, then request would be coming over here, and it would be handled by the method which is annotated using HTTP post. Okay, so you don't have to worry about it. We will be discussing web services in detail in some of our next videos. So for now, let's explore this. So whenever a web service is being called, we can use REST context class to get the request from the call out. Okay, so we can use this REST context, and where we have this request parameter there, so we can get the request body from REST context dot request body, and then we can convert it into a string. Okay, now this will be a JSON string, so we are passing it into a JSON.deserialize untyped method. Okay, and this JSON.deserialize untyped method will return us a map of string comma object, where string would be the keys in the JSON and object could be any values. Okay, so the any values means it can be a string, it can be integer, it can be a object itself, right? So once we get the details into this map of string comma object, we will use the keys which we know and fetch the values and assign it to different fields in feedback object. Okay, so we can fetch rating, we can fetch the message specified by the customer, we can fetch name, etc., and then we'll insert the feedback object. Now if you remember, in the request we have these comments also, right? So if you have seen the previous video of JSON and XML, you will get to know that this comments is key, and then again it is having a object only as a value. Okay, so to get this object again, what we have to do, so we will get the object using the key, and the format of this request dot data dot get comments would be an object, and to typecast it into a map of string comma object, we are using this map of string comma object typecasting. Okay, now once we get the comments into this map, We can create comment objects as well, right? So we'll create a list of comments and insert it over here, right? And then we are also attaching the comments to feedback object, correct? Yeah, so we have inserted a feedback record, we have inserted a comments also, right? Now it's time to send response back to the caller. Okay, so caller here means external systems, which is making call to the Salesforce, right? So for that, we can again use REST context class. In that we have this parameter response. So we can use REST context dot response and assign it to a REST response object, right? And we can set the status code as 200. Now here we have not handled error scenario. So in case of error scenarios, we can set different status, right? And then we will just serialize this object, feedback object. So that's the only thing we want to send again as a response to external system. So that's why we are serializing that object and assigning it into a string, and then using blob.value of we are assigning it to a response body. Okay, that's it. So this response will be sent back to the external system, which is making call to the Salesforce, right? And notice we have used here JSON.serialize. So I have already told you JSON.serialize is used to convert a Salesforce object or map into a JSON string again. So that's what we are doing here, right? Before sending the response back to the external system, we are converting it into a string and then converting it into a binary object and sending back as a response, correct? So we'll test this web service now, and before that I'll just add some debug logs so that you will understand how exactly we are deserializing this request. Okay, so I'll just add a request data here. Okay, we'll add couple of more debug logs. And we'll also add a debug log for comments. Okay, let's save this class. Now to test this Apex web service, what we'll do is we'll use Workbench for now. We can also use Postman, but in this video we are going to use Workbench to mock the call from external system to Salesforce, and we'll see how this web service is going to handle the request. Okay, so let's log into the Workbench. Okay. Now, to make call to the Apex REST web service, we need to go to the REST Explorer, and there we need to set the method type. So for now, we'll set the method type as post because we want to make a post HTTP REST call to the Apex service which we have written in the Salesforce, right? And here we need to specify the URL. So for Apex web service, we have to specify URL as /services/apex rest, and then the URL mapping which we have added in our class. Okay, so it has to be this URL mapping. Now this URL mapping, it has to be unique in Salesforce. Okay, so you cannot have two REST web service Apex class with same URL mapping. We'll get the request from our presentation. Now we'll add the request here in the request body, and we'll click on execute to make a HTTP post call to the Salesforce. Okay, so let's see what we are getting as a response. You can see we are getting 200 as a response, and this we are getting as a response from the web service. This is nothing but the feedback object record which got created, and you can see it is in a JSON format only, right? Let's look into the feedback objects and to see if there is a record which is created. You can see it record has been created over here for feedback object, and you can also see some records created for comment object as well, right? So this is the request actually which we sent, and based on that these object records has been created. Let's verify the debug log to see what exactly is the format in which we are sending the request and how we are parsing it, right? So we have already added debug log in our REST web service, right? So you can see this is the first debug log which indicates the REST request, and you can see the format is JSON. So this is the format in which we are getting requests from the workbench, and we are converting it using JSON.deserialize untype, and after conversion we are getting this map. Okay, so this is a map of string comma object, where string is a key and object is a value. For comments, you can see we have string like key as a comments, and value is again an object, right? So again, if you want to access the comment, we'll have to use the get and pass these comments to get the object from the map, and then convert it into again map of string comma object by typecasting. Okay, so if you see the last debug log which we have added for the comments, uh, this one, yes, so you can see here we have key value pairs again, right? And then here we have this map of string comma object which we get from typecasting, right? So this is how we can work with serialization and deserialization, and utilize JSON.deserialize untype method from the JSON utility to convert or parse a request which is not having a predefined format, right? Next, we'll see how we can use Apex class-based parsing in Salesforce. Okay, so to parse a JSON data into an Apex class, we can use an Apex class-based parsing method. And it is useful when you know the structure of a JSON data beforehand, and when you want to parse the data into a strongly typed representation. Okay, so in that case, you can use Apex class-based parsing. And for Apex class-based parsing, we have two ways. So first, we'll look into a way where we'll create an Apex class that corresponds to the structure of a JSON data. Okay, so for example, this is our JSON string, which an external system would be sending us, right? Where we'll have account name and industry value as a key, and these values as a value. So we can create an parser, let's say account parser, and we can create some variables in a class. But the important thing to note here is the name of variable should exactly match the keys present in the JSON request. Okay, so you can see here we have ACC name, and in the request and in the class also we are having ACC name. Okay, now once you have created the parser class, you can use JSON.deserialize method of JSON utility and pass the JSON string as a parameter, and you can specify the parser class which you are using to parse the JSON string. Okay, once you do that, JSON.deserialize will return the instance of a account parser class. Okay, now in Apex class-based parsing method, you can even use standard classes such as account or contact classes instead of creating a custom class. The only requirement is if the structure of a JSON data matches the field of a standard class. Okay, so let's say there is an external system which wants to create an account record into Salesforce using Apex web service. Okay, so if the request is containing the fields which are already present on the account object, so you don't have to create an custom class. Okay, so for example, if you see this request here, we have name as a key and we have industry as a key. Now both name and industries are already present as a field on account object, right? So you can directly use the account standard class to parse this request into a accounts instance, right? So what we have to do, we just have to use JSON.deserialize and pass the JSON string and specify the standard account class over here, which will be used to pass this JSON string and return an instance of account. Okay, so let's test the Apex class-based parsing also. So we'll go to our developer console, and here we have already created a test account service, which is nothing but again a REST resource, and we still have a post method here which we will be using to handle the requests coming from the external system. Now this post method, what it will do, it will take the request and pass it using a account parser class which we have already created, right? So this is an account parser class. In the request we have name, industry, employees, and revenue. Now these key does not match exactly to the standard fields present on account. That's why we have created account parser class over here. We will be using custom parser class. Okay, now if you see the first statement here, you can see we are getting the request string, and we are parsing it using account parser class. And so for that we are using JSON.deserialize, and then we are getting the instance of this parser class. Now this instance will have the request in a class format. Okay, here we are just verifying some required parameters. For example, in the request we have name and industry as a required field, so we can just verify account details dot name. If it's null, if it's null, we'll throw this uh, validation error to the external system which is calling the Salesforce, right? So we just have to specify status code as 400, and response body will specify this string. Okay, and we can return the control. Now, if everything is fine, these two fields are already present in the request. We can create a instance of an account object and insert it into Salesforce, and then we can set the response back to the caller. Okay. So what for sending the response, what we are doing, we are using account response wrapper class. So this is a response wrapper class I have created. Okay. So if you see the content of it, we are just returning account ID, account name, and number of employees. Okay. Now, why I have created is to show you how we can serialize the instance of an object. Okay, so we already have seen a deserialization in previous example where we were collecting feedback. We have seen deserialization here also. Just to show you how serialization work, we have used JSON.serialize over here, and for that we have created a instance of this response wrapper. Okay, and we are passing that instance into JSON.deserialize. So it will be serializing or converting the instance into a string, and this string we can pass it as a response body to the calling system. Okay. Now we can test this web service as well. So for that we'll just copy this URL mapping, and we already have this workbench open for us. So we'll just specify the URL here, and we can specify the request here. Okay, so let's click on execute. You can see we are getting 200 as a response, and also you can see the response body, we are getting it into a JSON format, right? So let's go to the account record and see if a record has been created or not. So in the request we have my account as a name. So this is the account record which has been created using the workbench. Okay, so you can see we have annual revenue and employees field being stamped correctly, correct? So this is how you can use Apex class-based parsing method. So we have already seen the scenarios where we can use this Apex class-based parsing method, right? Now, one important thing to note here is, let's say if we go to the request, and let's say if we add one more parameter. Okay, so I'll add one more parameter here as phone, and we'll add phone number. Now this phone parameter is not present in the Apex parser class. Okay, so if you go here and you will see there is no phone parameter or field present here in the Apex parser. So what will happen? So if you are using JSON.deserialize, in that case it won't throw any error, but this field won't be getting stamped on the record which is getting created. Okay, so let's say if I click on execute, it won't throw any error to us, right? You can see the record has been inserted, but if you try to see the account record, you will observe that phone field has not been stamped because it was not present in the Apex parser class. Whereas in case of parsing, if you are using JSON.deserialize strict here, and then if you are adding an extra parameter in the JSON request which is not present in the Apex parser class, in that case it will throw you an error. So let's try to execute this. You will see we are getting an error that this account.parser phone is an unknown field because it is not present in the parser class, right? That is why Apex class-based parsing method is preferred, where you already know the structure of a JSON request so that you can correspondingly create a parser class. Okay. So what are the best practices for JSON parsing in Apex? So first thing is you need to make sure that you are matching the data type in a JSON request with the corresponding data type in the Apex class. Okay. So for example, if a JSON field is expected to contain a number, make sure you are declaring a corresponding field in Apex class as an integer or double. Okay. Another thing is you need to make sure that all the required fields are present in the JSON request. So you can do that by checking a or applying a null check in your Apex web service before performing any DML operations, right? Next, make sure to map the JSON fields to the corresponding field in the Apex class. Now, this is important to ensure that the data from JSON request is deserialized properly into the Apex class. Okay. Also, if there are some JSON request which contains JSON objects, then you should be declaring the corresponding nested class in the Apex. Also, make sure to handle if there any errors are there in the JSON parsing process. So you can catch the JSON exception and handle it by returning a custom error message to the client. So in this video, we have covered the basics of JSON parsing in Apex Web Services. We have looked into untyped JSON parsing method and Apex class-based parsing method and when to use each of them, right? So JSON parsing is an important aspect of REST API, and understanding the JSON parsing is essential for any developer to work with web services in Salesforce. So thank you for watching this video. If you have any questions, you can comment down in the comment section.